We even have dreams about never, sorry, we even have dreams about what never was but could be, and then compare how we live to those ideal dreams. We need dreams to furnish ourselves with with ideas for action, but remain paralyzed in inaction. On the one hand, we get a little peace now and then when we escape our mind's constant evaluation, and on the other, we need that constant reassessment to get on in the world and to get the things we want. Then, when we do create something, it never lives up to the dream from which it came. Buddha was right. The suffering is built in. If we don't rescue ourselves from our intense attachment to too many expectations, we'll continue to be controlled by the anxiety of multiple choices, going crazy from too many options. Dream jam. We'll go numb from possibilities. Every time you make up your mind to say yes to one thing, you have to decide at the same time to say no to 40 others. Saying no to 40 possibilities just to say yes to one is a pain in the ass. How did we get to Dream Jam? Does it have anything to do with what is real? How did we get so far removed from necessity to become completely lost in the conversations of the mind? Resistance to limiting the future by commitment. To one project to the exclusion of others, or to one person to the exclusion of others, is the sickness of our time. The mind wants either the certainty of its own tradition, or it wants the hope of limitless accomplishment in the future. Thus, the mind imposes limits and hates limitations. We are hoist on our own petards. We are damned if we do and damned if we don't, forever trapped by our attempts to revivify the past or vivify a new future that excludes other possibilities. Okay. We are damned if we do and damned if we don't, forever trapped by our attempts to revivify the past or vivify a new future that excludes other possibilities. How do we rescue ourselves? We have to acknowledge the built-in nature of our suffering, accept both the voice that tells us we're not doing enough and the fact that we will never be able to do all that we want to do. And act anyway. We must accept and affirm the sacrifice of alternatives and take the pain. There are no shortcuts. I need to read that again. We have to acknowledge the built-in nature of our suffering. Accept both the voice that tells us we're not doing enough and the fact that we will never be able to do all that we want to do and act anyway. All that we want to do and act anyway. We must accept and affirm the sacrifice of alternatives and take the pain. There are no shortcuts. Okay. As I mentioned before, when we humans figured out the idea of hauling off our refuse, it saved more lives than anything else in the history of medicine. We can do the same now with the garbage of the mind. Expectations, plans, and hopes for the future will still voice themselves. But instead of becoming overwhelmed, we can focus on choosing a few and discarding the rest, and then acting only on what we have chosen. The good news is that when we choose, act, and let ourselves be, the yammering voice of infinite choice fades. It may still be there, but its hold over us dies. We need to know how to let all the good and bad images go, whether they are from the past or from the future. And we need to let all the good and bad feelings associated with those images die. Let not only anger, hurt, and bad feelings die, but let love die too. When either love or hate dies, love can be born again. That is particularly good news, and may be what Jesus was talking about. It's probably the meaning of the resurrection. Love dies to be reborn. When we let die our attachments to remembrances, expectations, moral imperatives, evaluations, comparisons, self-images, beliefs about how others should behave, ideals, and even romance, we make ourselves clearings for love's rebirth. Love is being wide open to the present, not blocked by nostalgia for some memory of the past or anticipation of some new love of the future. Love of another person happens only in a moment. Love is never having to say anything. How do we die to all the emotional attachments of the mind? The job in staying alive is always to detach ourselves from our concepts, particularly our concepts of how things are, who we are, and how we should behave. How things are. None of us are ever really looking at how it is out there. I have my view of how things are. You have your view of how things are. We have to depend, in case of disagreement, on another nut like ourselves, a friend, therapist, or judge, with some other view of how things are to arbitrate for us. And it's no accident that arbitrate comes from the same root word as arbitrary. The truth is, none of us ever know what is going on. We just agree to have beliefs in common as a way of keeping things together. It's amazing how we copy each other's views so well that we can have such organized living. It's also pretty amazing how groups of us are willing to defend to the death our interpretations against other groups' interpretations, or punish crooked interpretations within our own groups. It's amazing because there is really no way to tell if out there is out there or not. But whatever it is, it's all created by individual beings, who then get together and agree what to call it. Assuming that seeing, hearing, smelling, and so on are chemical reactions in organisms, then each individual organism, as I argued in Chapter 1, is the creator of the world. We have to see if our creations agree with each other by doing a lot of cross-checking in the course of growing up. Even then, just at the perceptual level, it's hard to get agreement among people about what the world really is and what it is like. Science is a formal attempt to agree on the criteria we are willing to accept as a basis of agreement, in advance of any agreements. In that way, the laws and agreed-upon assumptions of science are just like the laws and agreed-upon assumptions of the U.S. Constitution. We humans have spent a lot of time and energy for the past several thousand years trying to get clear on what are our agreements about perception and our agreements about value. People kill each other by the minute over what it all means. The solution probably won't ever be just having everyone believe the same thing. Instead of working toward commonality of views, we need to work toward common acceptance of the principle of variety. We need a variety of ways to look at how things are, because ultimately we have a better chance of supporting each other with a lot of ways of viewing things. It may feel less secure than if everyone agrees on what is true, but the feeling of security is just that, a feeling, not the real thing. Less secure is often more reliable. If there is not enough variety preserved in the gardens of illusion about how things are, then some version of 1984 totalitarianism will come true. This scenario is almost as bad as the more tragic one of being blown away or dying of poison. I think communal acceptance of a variety of illusions, with less murderous defense of belief, is a better solution. Beliefs about who we think we are. In order to render ourselves fit for such a community of acceptance of multivariant weirdos, we need to destroy who we think we are. Who we generally think we are is our reputations to ourselves. We think we are our memory of our past actions, attitudes, and remembered records. That's not who we are. But it takes a lot of learning and energy to discover that, just as it took a lot of energy and learning to build that picture of ourselves in the first place. The energy required for being who we really are, full persons, comes from burning all the bullshit beliefs you built your mind out of. Fortunately, since one's mind is a constant bullshit generator, there is an unlimited supply of fuel. When we are trying to protect and preserve our image of who we are, much of our time is spent in worrying. When we try to improve our image, much of our time is spent in fantasy. A lot of us get to the place where worry or fantasy are the only two choices we have. You go crazy when worry and fantasy are your only two options. Death of a Salesman's Willy Loman, who commits suicide as a last-ditch effort to match his own self-image, is a good example of the despair of gradually falling into fantasy out of worry and cutting loose from experience. In order to survive with enough sanity not to kill ourselves, we must learn to get lost in another place. That place is experience. We need to get lost in experience and entranced by just living and getting around and doing physical things in the world. Activity in one dimension of the awareness continuum allows for rest in the others. The dimension of the awareness continuum in which worrying and fantasy reside is called the mind. The two other dimensions of awareness, which I labeled earlier, are, respectively, what you notice in your body right now and what you notice outside your body right now. These two other aspects are categorizable as all present tense experience. The good life is being able to play in all areas of the awareness continuum with full concentration and to alternate where you put your attention at will. Playing golf, for example, gives some worriers a chance to get lost in something else other than worry. It doesn't help if they start worrying about the golf game, but it helps a lot if they get lost in the game rather than the worry. A major focus of any worthwhile psychotherapy is an attempt to reawaken this ability to get lost in experience by reawakening noticing. One of the first things to notice is that worry and fantasy, which are twins, have captured all of your attention. The second thing to notice is that when you aren't worrying or fantasizing, there is still something left. Along with worry comes feeling bad. Some people become gifted in getting conscious of feeling bad on purpose. Hamming up feeling bad and deepening the gloom to notice more about how one does it can lead to learning how to love the blues. Allowing yourself to feel bad gets you over it, particularly if at the same time you unload a bunch of secrets. If you are worried your mother-in-law will find out you smoke pot, tell her. You won't have that worry anymore. You'll feel better. You'll get some new problems, and you may find out that more is permissible than you've ever imagined. Sometimes a kind of deep brooding becomes enjoyable, like hearing a deep bass note. When you really get into the blues, you start feeling good. When you stop resisting worrying, worry becomes less worrisome, and willingness to let it happen ultimately ruins the blues. They run their course. Being able to come back from the blues and act in the world again happens naturally. Getting depressed is fine and expectable and probably helpful. Before there were too many social workers and psychotherapists, everyone expected to get the blues now and then. They also expected to get over them, to get creative and renewed now and then, and to get lost in their work and the world. Regularly alternating what captures our concentration is good for our health. The ability to get absorbed in gloom, in fantasy, or in being in the world so much that we lose track of who we are is a great power. Who is it that gets lost at these times when we seem so absorbed we forget everything else? Actually, it's not really a who, it's a what. What gets lost in the voiceover we are used to calling ourselves? What gets lost is the voiceover we are used to calling ourselves. We lose ourselves in some mental activity or task in the world, and in so doing create the possibility of discovering the self that's left when that false self is gone. We find out who we really are when we lose ourselves through concentration. I'm saying two things about this. First, it is of vital importance that you learn to be lost in both experience and in your mind, but not permanently, so that you get the avenue of escape each offers from the other. Secondly, when you get lost in what you're concentrating on, The you that gets lost track of is not who you are. Who you are is the I lost track of myself being, before you noticed you had lost track of yourself. Who you are is the concentration. Who we are is the being without an identity, within whom the mind and the perceiver and the reactor to experience reside. Who we are is a space within which two kinds of playing occur: experience and fantasy about experience. We are not our experience, and we are not our fantasies about our experience, past, present, or future. We are the theater in which those things occur. Who we actually are is about the same kind of being everyone else is: a fantastic electrical biochemical machine constantly creating reality out of being alive. In order to be fully alive, we have to constantly shed attachment to ideas from the past and about the future. The biggest, fattest idea to ditch first, in order to be creative, is the idea of who we are. One way we shed attachment to who we think we are is to face death. Michael Zimmerman, a modern existentialist philosopher, writing about Heidegger, explains that what allows us to rescue ourselves from our own egos is that we can see we are going to die. Revelation of my finitude serves constricting bonds to the past and frees me for the future. If I accept that death is always possible, the complacency of egoism disappears. Since I am here only for a brief time, there is no better moment than the present for choosing my own limited possibilities. Too often, I assume that my moment of truth lies in the future and excuses the slackness of my existence. Psychotherapy works like a death announcement, like a doctor telling you that you have only 6 months to live. The message is, you're not going to live forever, and you won't be able to do most of the things you want to do before you die, and there is very damn little you're in charge of anyway. If the client gets that message, it can considerably shorten the length of time it takes to conduct psychotherapy. The giving up that comes with the acceptance of one's own death and the futility of proving one's worth allows for freedom. Psychotherapy is for becoming free and creative. A freely functioning, creative being is one who has severed constricting bonds to the past. When the mind discovers that the past is dead, and furthermore, that all is dying, energy is eventually freed up for some project toward the future. But this freed up energy lacks the previous driveness and desperation of the ego trying to survive. Beliefs about how we should behave.